And it's up to you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this evening's conversation. Tonight, we're going to talk about cultural expectations and all the different things that we have around culture in our society. I'm I'm Andy. I'm Coach Andy. I'm the Midnight Coach, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Leslie. As you can see, I got Coach Leslie, but I'm just known as Leslie. I'm a mindset and emotional awareness coach for women, and that's my forte. That's where I lean into the window. I work with my clients around emotional awareness and how those trigger moments, how they show up, and making better decisions in those spaces, and just allowing yourself some grace, because you know what, we are emotional beings, and if it happens and you happen to have one of those moments where you don't feel so good about your response, that's okay, because we are human. As long as it doesn't become your normal way of living, and that you actually just use that as an excuse to be the way you are. So I'm excited about tonight's conversation because we've been talking about this. We did talk about this kind of briefly in our very first video, and we were nearing the end of our video, and we were talking about culture and how the differences, especially when it comes to relationships, romantic relationships, and then we started talking about also just culture and just in general, like the expectations that people from different ethnic backgrounds and the beliefs and expectations that are placed upon them from their generation before them, especially in North America, where now you have a different way of thinking. Like Western thinking is a lot different than maybe like people from China or Korea, Japan, or even other places like India and Pakistan. Like all of these different places have their own cultural things that they go by, and then of course they come to North America, and we've got this our own culture too. So it's kind of neat just to talk about it, because I thought, we can talk about it in a general sense, and we can also talk about it in the romantic, like relationship sense. So I don't know how you want to start this, Andy, but I love when you take the lead sometimes. So
Just like other relationships, we like to share the lead sometimes.
exactly.
I love that. Yeah, and that's exactly it. The cultural references. For me, the conversation is around what does it mean to be, American or Canadian. I mean, North American. What does it mean to be a part of our culture? Um, because a lot of I mean, we are made up of other cultures. Where we honor and accept and welcome so many different cultures from all over the world, and and we also um, like to create one unique culture out of that, right? So there's a whole bunch of layers and point of views to come at from, and specifically, and I mean, obviously during this past year with COVID and so many of the other cultural conversations coming up, there's been a lot of cultural conversation, a lot of cultural events. Um, Social media is addressing some of these. The streaming TV services are addressing some of these. Leaders in industry are addressing some of these conversations. So culture is becoming a big conversation these days. It's becoming a big topic, and it's an important. And we both thought, I think, we both thought it was important for us to address that and really bring it up and go, big picture, culture, what it means to be, Canadian or American, what it means to come to our countries, and what it means to be welcomed into our countries, but also very specifically what happens when a man and a woman from two different cultures marry, or a man and a woman from a culture marry here or come here or are married here, even if they're not necessarily first generation here.
Yeah, true. That's true. And when you think about it, like there has to be some level of, I don't know if the word is difficulty, but when you're dealing with cultural beliefs, and especially you have the generation before, wants to their legacy, I guess, to live on, they want you to actually, whether it's marry the same culture as you are, so that those beliefs, so those generational things are carried forward, and there's no like conflict, there's no like, mixing of cultures, there's no mixing or changing the way things are have always quote unquote been done, right? And so I
Yeah.
think I've just like seen just how people have had to deal with it, and it's not even just that, because it's the pressures, because I've even like had friends, like even in my own, like even in a very very old relationship of my own, where I was with somebody who was Greek, and we dated for like 7 years, and it was a very difficult conversation for him to have with his parents. And I think his parents really were, well, they, I know for a fact they did not approve, and that's just because it was not so much that they didn't like the person that I am or was at the time when they knew me, but it was because they had this belief that their son should marry a Greek woman, because what would the rest of their family say? Right?
Right.
Had not, and they could have been accepting of it, but what would the rest of the family say? And so I think that's where it comes down to is, there's that whole thing of worrying about what other people will say or think, especially within your own culture, like especially if it's the older generation, feeling like they have to worry about that. And I think because, like you said, you come to Canada or you come to the United States, and there is a melting pot of different people here. And so, and everyone's trying to bring some part of where they're from here, but then they're also liking and maybe adopting some of the lesser restrictive traditions that we follow. And so that's probably got to be a conversation that's I'm sure is very interesting behind closed doors for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just it it kind of like got me thinking, like how do people, and I guess, we usually we don't prepare for these. Okay, just as a spoiler alert, we do not prepare for these conversations. This is a conversation that we decided we wanted to have, but there was no prep work. And so it's not like we're coming to you with like real surveyed, people that are giving us their opinion. This is just from our own experiences through people that we know or
Yeah.
have been in contact with somehow. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a conversation. Maybe we could do a survey, and we could revisit it again another time. It's not like this will ever go away, because cultural expectations are going to be around forever, I think, just because people want their legacy to live on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess a good place to really dig into the conversation is, what does it mean? What is culture? Like, what actually is culture? Like, for a lot of us, it's the traditions, it's
Mm-hmm.
the way things have been done, the way we've always done things. And if we want to get very very granular about that and very very specific about that, I would be willing to bet that the way things have always been done has been no more than 3 or 4 generations, because each generation does change things. There
Mm.
might be there might be the way that we do things in India. There might be the way that we do things in China. There might be the way we do things in Holland. There might be the way we do things in Spain or in Canada or in the US. And all of those places, all of the world is changing every day. Our cultures are changing, our values are changing, our children are coming up with new and bigger things that they want that isn't the same as what we wanted. So, what actually, very, very specifically, what is culture? I mean, in my opinion, culture is just a matter of what our expectations are, what we
Yeah.
think our expectations are, and we assign those expectations to culture, because it's the way my mom did it, the way my dad did it, the way my grandparents did it. But really, is it the way that all, Dutch people do it? Or is it the way all French people do it? Is it the way, and I would be willing to bet that it isn't necessarily all.
Yeah, and I think too it's because the world is changing, and people are I mean, people can either stay within their own, like, this is how it's always been done and never evolve, or they can like try to adopt some other parts of things that they see, they learn from other people as part of their culture, and they can bring it in, still keep some of their own. But I was just Googling it, and one of the things I came up was it says, what's the best definition of culture? And what they've written here, this is like from 2017. So I'm just going off of the very first one that came to the top. And it's saying culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. It can be seen as the growth of a group identity fostered by social patterns unique to the group. So I mean, again, that's from 4 years ago. So who's to say that 4 years ago in France, well, now, especially with COVID, that's a whole thing
A
that's
whole
now
new.
making people having to do different things. So who's to say that the way things used to be done 4 years ago didn't evolve 4 years later? And still you're part of this culture, but you've adopted some new things. Because if you're not growing, then you're just like stagnant. And so you're, as a society, even in your own culture and the things that you grew up with, you still are going to grow by learning new things, adopting new things. You read, you learn. If you don't, then of course you're going to stay the same, and that's your expectation around that. But the younger generation, and especially because we're now that we have this platform that we're coming live on, I mean, like social media or right on, like the internet has changed everything, I think, for everybody. And so how can a culture stay specifically to its roots from way back when? And why would they not want to, like, at least upgrade and maybe make some changes? So that's just, I mean, that's my question. I would love it if there was anyone in the audience. I can't see anybody right now. There's nobody that's commenting, but it would be really cool if if you're not watching now, or if you're watching it back, just to maybe you can answer that question, because I'm curious, if you come from a different culture and maybe you have like your grandparents or your grandparents parents, or your even your own parents, and they're still holding on to those specific beliefs. How have you, like, have you adopted that into your lifestyle now, or have you changed anything? And what kind of pushback did you get? Because I'm sure there's been pushback, again, because I think it is legacy. And I think also, because we have our own mortality, we don't live forever. And so
Right.
if you die and your children don't carry that on, then that dies with you. And so there could be that fear. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I am too. And as you were thinking, or as you were talking, I was thinking, what really is the difference between the cultural expectations of the society that we came from versus our own values. I wonder if sometimes we don't assign our personal values to our culture. I prefer that my children marry within my own race and religion, and I'm going to say that that's a cultural thing, that all
Mhm.
Greek people marry other Greeks, and or all Spanish are Catholic and they all got to marry Spanish Catholic people. Is that something that I value as a person, like, and I want my children to marry that, or is that something that I think all people from my culture prefer? And as soon as we get into that granular kind of, like, that very specific kind of a value, we can see that it isn't literally every person, because there's always some people who don't want the same values. So what percentage and how much do I want to, like, is it really my personal value, or is it something I feel is pushed on me from my culture? And I think a lot of the times, we choose the characteristics from our culture that we like, and we ignore the ones that we don't like. And even two or three people from the same family might choose different cultural characteristics to carry on, and therefore culture evolves, and therefore our personal expectations evolve, and therefore the conversation comes more about what's our personal values, what is it we want. And when we get to that place, when we talk about our personal values, that's when we can start having conversations, rather than saying all Spanish people or all Chinese people do this, or talk that way, or act this way, or cook this way. We can say, I prefer it when. And when I'm talking to, like, for example, you and I having this conversation, or if I'm talking to, a potential wife or girlfriend, or or a spouse of some flavor, or if I'm talking to a coworker or some other kind of a partner, um, we can have those conversations much more intimately about, this is what I prefer. It's not so much this is what I have to do because of my culture, but this is what I prefer from my culture.
Right.
This is what I want to be.
Yeah, and I also think it could be part of an identity thing too, because
Yeah,
how are you identifying yourself? Because a lot of the time people, it's like really actually knowing who you are. And when you have to identify yourself as this and you put yourself in a box, and then who are you if you step outside of it? So I think there's also the fear of like, okay, well, if I don't follow the cultural expectations that are placed, that are I'm being told is what I'm supposed to believe, I'm supposed to follow. This is how I'm supposed to live my life. What happens if I step outside of out of that? Like, and there's that whole, the discomfort of the unknown zone. Like I like to call it a lot. I call it the unknown zone of possibilities. But a lot of time, people fear the getting, stepping outside of their comfort zone because they can't control the process. They can't control the outcome. They can't see what's going to happen. Sometimes they want to control every step of the way, and it doesn't work out the way they want, and so it could become part of, who how do they identify themselves? Is it a person who is, like you said, it could be someone who is Chinese, or it could be someone who's Italian, or someone who's Greek, or someone who's Black. How do they identify themselves? Because I know the census tries to put you in this box. Are you white, Black, Hispanic, or other, like combination?
yeah,
And it's like, you're putting me in a box. But what if I actually identify differently than that? Like
right,
for me, I grew up, as an example, I grew up when the very first census were coming out, and it was you were either white or you were Black. But I'm not just one. My mother's white and my father's Black. So why are you asking me to choose? So it's
right,
this whole, and this could even lean into like the society is telling me what I should be like, because there could be the society's got their own culture too, right?
right.
But that's what I felt really like. How do for a long time, I battled like with that whole concept. Like I didn't want to answer that question because I thought you're asking me to choose between the two. And I didn't feel comfortable, but I had no choice. And I
Right.
wasn't given the choice. And I think that's what's happening. Like now, I think with the younger generation, I'd be curious to know, are they allowed the choice, or are they still being told that they don't have a choice when it comes to that?
I think that's actually an ongoing conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is where a lot of the younger generation is sitting, and not just with race or creed, but sexual identity and, nationality and culture. There's so many different factors in that. Um, for example, I know a lot of people who are Black or Hispanic or Indian or, some sort of Oriental, that they identify as Canadian or they identify as American. I'm as American as you are. And, just because I'm not, white redneck from the South does not mean I'm less American, right? That's, and a lot of the times people who don't look that way feel like they're not accepted in the same way, but they're just as American as the rest of us. They're just as Canadian as the rest of us. So oftentimes people and a lot of times we're not allowed to choose the Canadian culture or the American culture unless we're plain white,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not accepted by those culture, our natural culture, unless we're just plain standard white. And that's the part where I wonder if we're not trying to hold on to an identity, because I find the white European cultures often, not all the time, but often have less of a problem discussing culture within themselves and within their families, because they can hold on to what they call their home culture.
Mm-hmm.
Hungarians cook Hungarian, Ukrainians cook Ukrainian,
Mm-hmm.
Dutch cook Dutch, Italians cook Italian, and we might have pressure from our families to marry within those people, but if we don't, it's less common to find pressure from the families. Whereas if you're visibly different, there is a far more pressure, I find, to marry within your own culture, to not just marry but keep your cultural background, to
Mm-hmm.
keep, keep your traditions, to keep your points of view, and to keep your ways of being in relationship, the ways of attending work, and the ways of worshiping. And I find that there's pressure that way from different cultures to act different ways, and I wonder where all that pressure comes from. And that's why this cultural conversation is important to me, because I want to I want to share, I want to enjoy, I want to be human and share with other human beings. Like I want to experience this life with as many different kinds of people as I can.
Yeah, and it would be so nice. I mean, I know it's a dream, but I know that people try to say that they don't see color or they don't see differences, but
Hmm.
unfortunately you do. And that the only reason that it's true is because we do look different from each other. But it's really taking a little bit of a deeper look at a person from the inside,
Hmm.
and the person that they're being, is that's to me more important than someone who, wherever they came from, whether they learning about each other is allowing ourselves to grow. And so this expectation of, oh well, this person is this persuasion, and so this is exactly how they are because that's what I've always seen, or that's what I experienced. And you may have only experienced it one time, but then you throw everyone into the same bucket and that's it,
Right.
that's who they are. And so I know you've said like redneck in that, and so I know, I mean, I guess my understanding of a redneck is someone who has a redneck. And yet, when someone calls themselves a redneck because they say, I'm from the South, and so because of the sun, and I get the redneck, but that's also gone to become a more negative connotation underneath because of the people who are from the South who might have that negative part of, like frame, their persona, they're not a
Right.
nice person, and so to me it doesn't seem fair that someone would, because they come from the South, and so maybe people from the South are traditionally calling themselves rednecks, it's not necessarily fair, I think, to lump everyone into that same category if
Correct.
they're not like that, the negative part of it, because it doesn't seem fair, right? And it would be the same thing for like any culture or any,
Yeah.
like any color person, like for like black people, when they say, people are afraid of, as an example, I've heard people say they're afraid of black men. Well, what's the reason behind that? And then they go into this whole thing about the fear of, there's just something about them that they're scary. Well, why? There's that, just because that's a belief that they were told, something they were told, and they believe it enough that it just has become
Right.
something common for them to think about. So they put everybody in that bucket. And so
Yeah.
it's, yeah, it's like there's so many different, I think every person, like for me, I don't believe, like I believe there's one race, and it's the human race. Okay. I just
I
believe that
agree.
there's different color skin, different backgrounds, like ethnically, the cultures and all of that stuff. But I feel like each of us brings to the table our own beliefs around the other guy, that looks different
Yeah.
from me. And so I'm going to like put the other guy and anyone who looks like the other guy into the same bucket. And so, when you have people who've had maybe a bad experience, who with, like, as I just like to say, I'll just say this guy and the other guy. And so this guy has a bad experience with that, the other guy, he's going to put everybody in that category the same. And so will never allow himself to get to know anyone else within that culture because of that one experience, and believing
Right.
that they're all like that. And so that's an expectation too, I think, because they pass it down to their kids, and their kids will then grow up without even ever having an interaction with someone who's different from them, to formulate their own opinion before they're already told how to think and what to
Yeah.
believe.
And I agree that is exactly the definition of expectations is we have an expectation that everybody who looks like that or is from that culture or is from that place or from that religion, that they're all going to act like that. That's an expectation that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where cultural expectations, where this conversation originally came from. That's where we were going at the end of that very first video.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when we ran out of time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we can really look at ourselves and say, is that an expectation I want to have? Is that an expectation that really gives me the life I want to live? Or am I missing opportunities? Or am I closing doors to myself because of that? And that's a conversation that we've had in this group that you and I both came from often.
Mm-hmm.
How much do we want to limit ourselves and our experiences because of some expectation that we've had, some judgment that we've made, some assumption that we've made,
Mm-hmm.
and the expectations we have made because of those assumptions, and that's where each of us can sit down and decide, do I like these expectations? And if I do, then why don't I associate with other people who share my expectations, who share my values, instead of requiring or expecting everyone else to follow those same values? I think there is room on our planet and even in our countries to connect and share and love other people who are similar to us, and allow those who want to expand our boundaries to do so without offending, hurting, or actually damaging the people who don't want to expand their boundaries. There
Mm-hmm.
is room for all of us to share this planet. There is room for all of us to share this country, these countries. There is room for all of us to have our values and our cultural expectations. There is room for us to share. And that's what
Absolutely.
I want.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and it's funny you say, because I remember back in grade seven, I forget his, I think his name was Mr. Sainsbury. Of course, you only know the Mr. and the last name, right? But I
His
remember
first name,
him,
Mr.
and I remember him saying like he thought it would be so amazing if one day everybody was with everybody and there was no one specific race, like, and he was using the word race at the time. And then I started thinking more about it later on in life, thinking, well, that's a great idea, it's a great thought, but then what happens when you have this you've got this new mix and you got this new mix over here? Well, then they think they're better and they think they're better, right? So it's I think it really doesn't have anything to do with different backgrounds getting together. It's a meeting of the minds. It's like really like, and not allowing the other stuff, the external stuff, to influence how you meet with someone. So having these conversations, don't come to the table expecting that you're going to be a specific way or I'm going to be a specific way. So we're putting expectations on there. And again, we've talked about this. Expectations are I centered, and so it's not we inclusive. And so it's really about how we can have conversations with other people that don't look like us or don't come from the same background as us, or maybe you're in a different part of the world, and just being able to have a conversation without it without anything else except getting to know each other as human beings, and not having that expectation that, oh, you're that from that background, or that's how you're going to be like, or you're
Right.
you're white, so you're going to be exactly this is how you're going to show up, or you're black, this is how you're going to show up. And so it's just not having that expectation from the get-go, like, not. And so when I say not to see color, it's not about you will see color, you will see difference, but if you can see past that, and past the cultural differences, and past the different, like, religions and all of that someone has, and just meet them on the same level that you are, which is as a human, getting to know them there, might surprise yourself what you'll learn. But it's like, how do you get people to actually bridge that, like, to cross over into that territory, allowing themselves not to be swayed or distracted or pressured by other people not to have these conversations?
Right. It's funny that you asked that very question. How do we get past that? I used to be a supervisor in a retail environment where I was responsible for training people underneath me. Um, and so, and I taught them a method that was not generally accepted in retail. And what I taught my guys, because it was in computers, it was mostly men, so
Mhm.
I would call them my guys. What I taught my guys is um, it's okay to stereotype somebody based on what you see, as long as you don't stick them in that box and not let them out.
Mm.
So most of us do have a cultural expectation based on how we look.
Mhm.
You know, white people do expect that people will treat me the way they treat other white people.
Mhm.
Black people expect people to treat them the way they treat other black people, and they're okay with that. We're okay with that as a first impression, as long as we're
Mm.
not stuck in that box,
Mhm.
right? I'm okay with whoever I talk to, and they walk up to me and they treat me like a white person, as long as I can step out of that box as we get into conversation. So that's what I would tell. I would teach the guys in my department, is I would teach them it's okay to have that as a basis to start the conversation, so that we're not walking up and dropping f-bombs to this little old lady who's clearly from some sort of a traditional culture that is going to be offended by that.
Mhm.
um, and then maybe we get in the conversation and she starts dropping f-bombs, so it's perfectly fine to do so. you know I use that example because that was actually the very first time I ever dropped an f-bomb on the sales floor, was with a little old lady and her husband. Was a retired couple who were not simply retired, but were actually like closer to their 80s.
Okay.
And that was the first time I dropped an f-bomb on the floor, and it not just didn't defend them, it actually helped them to feel more comfortable. So as I got into the conversation with them, I got past that original assessment of them, that original stereotype I called it,
Mhm.
and I was able to allow them to step into the personality that they wanted. I stepped into the personality I wanted, and we shared and we connected. And of course, in the sales environment, that's how you sell stuff, right? You connect with people.
Mhm.
So that's what I would teach my guys, and that's how you start the conversation. You start the conversation with a loose idea of what you think they're going to be like, as long as it's both loose and open to change, open to evolve. As long as you're willing to let them show you who they really are,
Mhm.
because we do have to make some assumptions. Because
Mhm.
if we make no assumptions at all, we'll probably offend most people. So it is safe to make some generalized assumptions based on what they look like or what environment they come from, as long as we don't stick them in that box. We can say, this is the box I think he might fit in, and ask them about that, or maybe start the conversation with a little bit of compassion and openness. The way, I mean, when I met each of you guys in that other group, when I met each of you in that group, we made some assumptions about each other. We all did.
Sure.
And it didn't take long, 5 or 10 minutes, and we had jumped right out of those boxes into a completely different conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because we made some assumptions right off the bat, but we weren't willing to nail that box closed.
Yeah.
We were all willing to evolve and share, and that's what has caused us to become great friends. And and that's what I think that how we can do that. The first step is, yeah, make some general assumptions, and make sure that you don't limit them to those assumptions. Allow them to show you who they really are.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a great, great tip because you're right. I mean, you have to be able to at least say, okay, I have to have a place to start this conversation. But again, it's just being open to like getting past the
Yeah,
what you are expecting them to be like or you're thinking that they are like and allowing yourself to like let them pleasantly surprise you and reveal their true self. And that's also letting them feel comfortable enough to reveal who they are too, comfortable enough to have
yeah,
that conversation. But if you go in hot, you are not going to get you're going to get exactly the response you're expecting on the box that you put them in because you went in hot. And so I know I love that analogy. That's very cool.
yeah,
Definitely think that's a great thing, and I think that teaches people too just to kind of, it kind of teaches them too that it's being respectful and allowing yourself to just, like come from a place where maybe you're even being empathetic, towards someone else's situation, especially if this is an IT situation and someone's got issues going on, and or they're trying to buy something, and they need that extra step, that extra helping hand, but allowing them to feel comfortable that they're talking to someone who gets them, and who
Yeah.
understands, and who's willing to actually get them, and not just like it's just like, oh, you're making assumptions about me and this is how you're treating me. And I think that's what's happened to a lot of people is they get into these conversations and are already making these assumptions, but they're not moving past the assumptions, and so the
Right.
conversations never really go anywhere. And I think that, and it's funny. I have to tell you a funny story. Way back, like a couple of years ago,
At least 2 years ago.
at least two. No, I'm saying four, but at least a couple of years ago. No, this is before I was married, and I was dating that Greek guy at the time, but I was out with some friends, and I remember this really good looking. I think he was Chinese. He was a really good looking guy. Anyways, he said to me, he goes, "I wish you were Chinese because I would definitely date you." And I just thought it was so funny. But that was so he was already being like molded and shaped that this is who he had to be with, was someone
Yeah.
who was Chinese. But I mean, I was dating someone at the time anyway, but I think back to that moment, and it's like, yeah. So even like it's been it's been a few years, like a couple, and and it's just, when I think about that, it's hard, like it's tough for people
Yeah.
who allow that to influence them, the cultural things, and how do they, and again, another question would be like, so you have generational your generation before you telling you that this is the cultural beliefs we have, and it doesn't even have to be Chinese, Italian and Greek. I mean, it could just be plain old white America or white Canada, like it could be just white people being told themselves, this is what we expect of you. This is what our parents expected of us and their parents before them. And we want you to marry a white girl who is, say you are religious. So she has to be Christian, and she has to want children. And you've got to fit into this mold, and she's got to fit into that mold. And this is what we are expecting of you. And so how does someone break away from that? Because that is actually a question that I am really super curious. How are people breaking away from that? Because I still haven't, other than the one person that I told you about during our first conversation, which I still have not reached out to her. I haven't actually, I've been kind of like, I guess, busy, and I just forgot. But yeah, she was Chinese and went through law school. And after practicing for a year, she decided it wasn't for her. Like, she did not want to be like the standard lawyer.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, I often wonder, like, how was she able I mean, I was in awe of her to do that, number one, because it's so expensive to go to law school. But then now that I'm thinking more on it, it's like that whole cultural thing. Like, I knew that she came from a family of doctors and lawyers and people that were like, very successful. Like, that's the things that it had to be a very successful career. But I often wondered, how does someone break away? Because we're talking, I've been married 25 years. So we're talking at least maybe, 15 years ago that I saw her, that she decided that she wanted change. And so I often wonder, how does someone break away in that respect? Because there's a, there is the traditions, maybe we expect you to go to law school. What if you don't want to go to law school? What if you don't want to be a doctor? What if you want to be a musician or an artist, or maybe you want to be a nurse, or maybe you want to be something else? Like, how do you break away from that? Those are expectations placed upon you by your parents. Now, those expectations were placed upon them. So maybe they're doctors and lawyers, and now they're saying, "Well, I want you to do this." But how do you break away from that? Like, how do you find a way that you can find your own voice? Because your identity is their your parents' identity maybe is being wrapped up in your life because they want their legacy to live on, and through you doing the things that they are not, I don't know if it's imposing, but they're telling you, we want you to go to law school, or we want you to be a doctor, so we want you to go to medical school, whatever that looks like. How do you break away and become your own person? And in this, especially, you know, I mean, in this world, it's still, I'm sure, still very hard to break away.
Yeah. I have a direct answer for that because I did that.
Okay.
Uh, the reason I wear the name Redneck, my dad, the man who raised me, he was classic oil field, farmer kind of redneck. He went
Okay.
hunting every day off. He was out west, out in the mountains hunting, shooting something, fishing. He was outdoors. He was out when he wasn't out fishing. He was building something. He was gone a lot. He was big and burly. He got the nickname of Tiny. He was as classic redneck as you could possibly get. And I remember, I have a memory that we were out in the fishing boat. Him and my brother and my sister and I were out in the fishing boat one day out in the lake. And I was cold. It was a bit breezy off the lake, and I was cold and I was shivering. And I shiver very, very quickly, even when I'm a little bit chilly. And he looked at me dead in the face and he said, You'd better get an inside job because you'll never make it in the real world. So his identity of a proper job was an outside job, was an outdoor job, a hands-on, work your butt off, get out in the world and do the work kind of a job.
Mm-hmm.
The intellectual or creative jobs were not real jobs to him. And of course, by that very indication that I was cold in the boat and shivering, I was not going to be one of those guys. And I was not going to have an outside traditional, trades kind of a job. And so I had to break that identity. And part of how I broke that identity is why I still wear the name of redneck, because I don't have a lot of the characteristics, the negative characteristics that rednecks are typically associated with. Yet I still wear the name because I have a lot of the positive characteristics. So what I did and how I did that is I had to take a good, long, hard search inside myself for my personal values. What do I actually want myself? And it was hard. First of all, I didn't know that I could even do something like that. That wasn't even something that occurred to me when I was younger. Let alone, once it did occur to me, how do I do that? Like, really, how does a person figure out who they are? I mean, I was told who I am. Like, I'm just told, right? And that's so. First of all, we got to know that we can, and second of all, we really do have to decide. So those people who have broken away from those traditions, from those cultural traditions, from those expectations, from culture, from family, from history, those people who have broken away from those traditions, those expectations, that's how. That I'm 95% sure. I'm willing to bet that everybody who has ever broken tradition in that way, that's how they did it. They had a good long search inside themselves, probably with many tears, probably with a lot of grief and separation, because we're losing connection to something that's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And we're losing that in order to gain connection to something that's even more valuable, ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for me, that's how I did it. And I'd be willing to bet money that that's how pretty much everybody who has broken tradition or broken cultural expectations has done that, is by taking a good long search inside themselves and seeing what they personally value. And actually, I would be willing to even say that a lot of people who uphold traditions and don't break tradition also do that, because a lot of people will search inside themselves and find that they do value their family's values. They do value their cultural values. They do value the things that I was brought up with, and I want that. And they're often the ones who are the biggest proponents of, we need to keep culture in our family. So just because you do a big search inside yourself and wonder and see what your personal values are, does not mean you're going to break from tradition. It's not something to fear. You shouldn't fear looking at yourself to see what your values are because you're going to break tradition, because most people don't, but some do. The ones who do, that's how they did it. That's my take on the subject. That's how I did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's great. And I think bringing that into to the mix about values really makes a big difference, I think, because our core values, I think, is what will help us in our lives. And so, just choosing them and what you believe in and what you stand for will help you to navigate parts of your life. And but having the courage to say, you know what, I don't need to fit into this cookie cutter mold that you told me I belong in, and being able to like go out and say, you know what, this is who I don't have to identify with that. I can identify however I choose, but taking that closer look inside, and it's not just about being able to just do that, because sometimes it's hard. And so one of the things, like to suggest to people that I know is having that core, I call it my core five, but having a core group of people, whether it's men and women, mix of both, people of you can like reach out to, that support you, encourage, uplift you, and that don't judge you, but just are there to either just listen or give advice if you need them. I think that will help as well, especially if you're trying to break a traditional or cultural, way of life and move into your own identity. And like, it doesn't mean that you're breaking away. And so that's part of it too. It's like, don't be afraid that you have to like cut ties, like I'm done. It's just finding your way, what works for you, and evolving your culture, right? Because if you grow, I think it makes this place a better place. So you can still be, if you still want to marry someone who's within the same ethnic background as you, fantastic. But come from a place where it's not just about that's all that you're putting yourself in. Like you've got yourself in this square and that's it. And you don't allow anything to be different. And so that's why I always say, like, having not only your values, but having those people, that really, are that positive influence too. And so taking a look at who you surround yourself with too could be another way of reflecting, because maybe some of your beliefs are being, reinforced, like from before, like the cultural things are being reinforced by the people that you surround yourself with, that not necessarily will help you to grow. And so it's just making that choice too. But it is a choice. I mean, we have the choice. It's ours. I mean, we can write our story however we choose to. It's just, do we want to? Do we want to break away from some of those traditions? Do we want to break away and make our own path and decide what we want to do? Do we want to keep some of those things and bring them with us, keeping it, just evolving it in a way that's not, you're not losing everything, but you're bringing it with you and you're making it better. Like I don't think there's a manual that says that if you're this, whatever culture it is you are, that you can't change. But I think that, but then I think the only way where that really kind of, and I kind of take that back a little bit, I think the only way where that really would maybe be true is if you have religion as being the thing that motivates you to stay within a specific cultural belief. Because then you've got, if religion is in the mix, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with religion because I'm a Christian, but I believe that if you have, like your religion where it's telling that you can't be with other people because that's a belief that's been adopted in the background, your upbringing, within your religious beliefs, that is another, that can be another really hard thing to break away from. Because I've talked to people, just as an example, who are, they've broken away from, um, being a Jehovah's Witness, and how that has really impacted their life, and some of the main hardships, really big hardships that they've had to go through, because they broke away from that religion. And it was considered a religion for them, for their family. It was a way of life. It was the end all be all. You believe it. If you leave it, you are shunned. And so some of the people that I've talked to who have actually left that the church, they've left being Jehovah's Witness, have been shunned. And so what that has done and how it's impacted, that can be hard too, because then you, like you said, Andy, you're losing a part of you, and it's scary, especially if those that that you grew up with, everything about that life, are no longer part of your life. And so now it's like you're starting from ground zero. And
Yeah.
so that's another conversation too, because I have spoken with a few people, and how it has impacted their life has been, it's been a hard road for them, some of them, to go through,
Yeah.
while they've broken away and made their own life, and made their own identity, and it's not so much an identity, but just changing what the things that they believe in and their values, and having to change that whole lifestyle, because now they had to start all over again, and they had to create, some of them had to create actual families because their families shunned them. So yeah, that's another conversation too, I think we could really get into.
Yeah. Yeah. What I was thinking about when you were talking about the way you mentioned that, um, reminded me of a piece of a conversation that we were having last time, and one that I wanted to address again this time is, even religions change, even religions evolve. The Catholic faith, which I have converted to, I'm a part of now, and um, they're the ones who have the most famous conversions through history, where they've evolved and changed and become different, and yet we're still often judged by the same standards we were 500 or 1,000 years ago. And all religions change, all cultures change. No culture is the original culture on the planet. Like, there's no such thing as this culture is still the same as it was 4,000 years ago, right? The Chinese culture is known, world renowned, for being the most ancient culture, and yet I promise you that they don't act the way they did now, the way they did even 50 years ago, let alone
Mm-hmm.
4,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So all religions change, all cultures change, all people evolve, and how they evolve is the individuals within each culture choose different values.
Mm-hmm.
And if just as a metaphor, for example, if a culture contains 4,000 people, and the 2,000 children who are born to them, half of them choose a few different cultural expectations, then the culture evolves.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the culture evolves to include those new expectations, and that's how cultures change. That's how religions change. As families leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, as families leave the Catholic faith, as families leave and convert to other places and do other things, these religions evolve. The Muslims have evolved, the Christians have evolved, the Buddhists have evolved. All of us have evolved. We're not what we were 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, even 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We all do. And one of the things that I think traditionalists refuse to recognize is that evolution. It does happen, and I think that's one of the things that I think is how our world chooses to grow and become healthier. Is we choose to evolve in the ways that we think will help our society, whatever that society is, whether it's our North American society, or whether it's an Indian society, or a Dutch society, or whatever. We choose to evolve based on the characteristics that each generation prefers, and whether it's religion, or whether it's culture, or whether it's within the family, or whether it's just within each individual person, we choose those values and characteristics that support what we want to see. And evolution happens. I mean, the larger scale the culture, or the larger scale the religion, the greater number of people have to choose change before change happens. But that doesn't mean change is necessarily slower.
Mm-hmm.
There are some cultures who entire generations of people had a completely different value from the last generation, and entire cultures have evolved in a single generation. Entire millions of people cultures have evolved in a single generation just because a value came up that a whole swath of people wanted to change. And I think I think myself, that's partly what happens in North America is we have entire swaths of populations that want to change a value, and every few years a major value changes. And that's one of the things that happened during this pandemic is a lot of the cultural and racial conversations have evolved in a big way in the past 12 months.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow. Well, we're coming up on our hour. It's I cannot believe there's like 5 minutes left. Yeah. I mean, this has been really like enlightening. I really love talking about, these things because it's just getting the conversation started and
Yeah.
and it's just having a conversation with somebody else. Like we've gotten to know each other over the past year, and it's just, we come from different backgrounds. We're just, I think, still even we're still scraping the surface of even getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And so, but we have allowed ourselves that space. We've allowed ourselves to bridge the gap of looking different, of growing up different, of being different genders, of, and not having an expectation on each other, like this is how you should act or this is how you should speak, and just giving each other that respect. And so that's one thing I think is one thing I love about social media too is it's bringing people together like this. There are a lot of different organizations that have these conversations on, online forums, which is good. It's coming to the front. Like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we are different. Let's talk about how we are similar. I think if we can bring the conversation back to how we are similar, that would be great, because now we're going to bring it back to a positive place rather than, oh, how are we different? Because I always feel like different means that then someone could maybe say, well, I'm different, so I'm better. Whereas I can say we're the same because we're similar. And so that makes us better together. So, and I always feel like we are better together. I think as a society, we weren't born to be solo adventurers or by ourselves. Like we were meant to be in community and to have connections with each other. And so that's why I think a lot of, with Canada and with the States, and having all of these different ethnic backgrounds, all of these people come from all over the world to come and live here, just even if they're in and out going to school, but they're actually leaving a piece of them behind by just their interactions with people and giving you a different perspective of what life is like somewhere else through someone else's eyes is kind of, I would think, that's a wealth. Like that's like a gift to actually meet up with somebody from somewhere else who can teach you a little bit about themselves and where they come from. And even if they don't stay, that you've actually had that interaction should be something that you really lean into being grateful for. So I love this conversation. I wish we could go on longer, but it is getting late. We definitely, I know you and I are going to have conversations about how we've talked about it really like deeply about where we're going to take this and how we're going to show up. So, we came, we're talking about cultural expectations today, and we're going to actually have a conversation. Andy and I, we're going to really dial it into what what the series is of videos coming up are going to be, so that you can kind of you can kind of like get yourself into that mindset of like where we're going, so that you can then follow along, and you at least can then say, oh, this is coming up, this is something that's relevant to me, I want to listen to it, and then you'll be a part of it. So we're just going to let you in on it, like what we're doing.
Once we have a plan is what that actually
Once we
is.
have a plan. Yeah, I went about it the long way. I took the long road and kind of told you this whole story. I think it's because I've been living. My husband's like that. He'll start a story, and he goes off over here, and it's like I have to bring him back. So Andy did that
That's
for
me.
me. Well, it's been an honor speaking with you tonight. I really
I
love our
love these conversations.
conversations, and I'm excited for the next ones. I'm excited to see where this goes and how we evolve it. And I
Yeah.
want it to grow. So like if you're not watching it now, that's okay. But if you're watching it back, would love it if you could subscribe to the channels, just because the more people we get subscribing, the more it's going to get, the algorithm's going to get out there and people are going to start noticing. Share the link with your friends, so let them know what we're talking about. And we'd love for you to just become a part of this community and be a part of our conversations. So I guess on that, Andy, is there anything you want to say before I end our broadcast?
Just one quick note, in case it wasn't already clear, we're both from Canada. We're both currently in Canada. That's why we talk about North America, not just America. Um, we do include our neighbors to the south, and you've spent a lot of time in the States, and so we do. That's why Canada comes up in our conversations a lot. That's I just wanted to clarify and offer that. Thank
Sounds
you. I
good.
love this conversation.
Yeah.
We got to. We're doing. I'm just loving what we're doing with this. It's
Yeah.
great.
Me too. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have any questions or any comments, please post them, and we promise we will get back to you. Looking forward to our next conversation. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time that might be for you. All right. Bye for now.
Perfect. Bye bye.